Today, I want to talk to you about the difference between being a customer and a client when you're purchasing a home in Georgia. There is a real distinction, and that distinction dictates the level of service that you'll get from the real estate agent that you hire to help you find a home. So, the first thing that I want to touch on is what the customer relationship looks like. If you elect to be a customer, that means that your real estate agent will only be able to perform ministerial duties for you. So, what are ministerial duties? Essentially, those are things that don't require any level of professional skill. And I'll give you some examples of ministerial duties. If you would like to be a customer, your real estate agent can provide you with listings. They can help you gain access to those listings. And that's pretty much it. They cannot advise you in any way. They can't provide you with comps. They can't suggest how much to offer. They can't even fill out the purchase and sale agreement beyond putting the information that you tell them to put in the contract. And essentially, what I do when someone elects to be a customer is that I just provide them with the blank contract because I don't want any confusion. I only represent you as a customer, and I am only providing you with ministerial assistance. So I print out the contract, print out the seller's property disclosure and any other disclosures that might be required, and email those to the customer so that they can fill them out themselves. I don't look at them, I don't review them, I don't tell them that they may have done something incorrectly, because that would be providing guidance. And when someone elects to be a customer, I can't give them any guidance or assistance. So once they've filled everything out and transmitted it back to me, the next thing that I can do is email it to the listing agent. However, I cannot negotiate for a customer. So as you can see, when someone elects to be a customer, they really aren't getting a very high level of service. On the other hand, if someone elects to be a client, they are going to get a full service experience. And I'm just going to pull up the document that a home buyer has to sign if they elect to be a client. It is called the buyer brokerage agreement. So I'm going to do a quick screen share because there's a very important section of the buyer brokerage agreement that I want you to see. So hold on for just a second while I pull that document up. Okay, so this is the buyer brokerage agreement. And what I want you to pay close attention to is this section here. Let me see if I can just circle it for you. Yes, I can. So this section here, it says state law prohibits broker from representing buyer as a client without first entering into a written agreement with buyer under Official Code of Georgia Annotated, Section 10-6A1 et sec. What does that mean in regular language, in everyday language? It means that if you want to be a client, you have to sign a buyer brokerage agreement. When you elect to be a client, like I said, you're going to get a full service experience. We can send you listings. We can help you gain access to the properties that you're interested in. When you see something that you want to make an offer on, we can pull comps for you. We can advise you on how much to offer and on what other terms to include in your offer. We can, once you've signed the offer, transmit it to the listing agent or the seller if you're dealing directly with the seller. and we can negotiate on your behalf. And we can assist you through every step of the process through closing and beyond. So there is a huge difference between being a customer and a client. Now, I've been a real estate agent in Georgia for 20 years. And for as long as I've been an agent, we have had to secure the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement or some type of brokerage agreement in order to designate that you are a client or in order to solidify that you are a client. There's the exclusive brokerage engagement, there's the non-exclusive engagement, and people call them different things. I tend to call it a buyer brokerage agreement, even though it says exclusive buyer brokerage engagement agreement. That's a whole lot to say. But my point is that if you're going to be a client, you've got to have some type of brokerage agreement or engagement that you have signed. That is the law in Georgia. If you're going to be a customer, then you have to sign a document called a customer acknowledgement. And I'll just pull that up right quick, just so that you can see what it looks like. And my annotation is still there, so forgive me. But anyway, that is the agreement to work with the buyer as a customer. Now, like I said, in Georgia, we've always had to do this, but there was no hard and fast rule as to when the document had to be signed. Some people, and I am one of those, I like to get it signed at the beginning of the relationship because I didn't want there to be any confusion. I have spoken with other agents who would wait until they were drafting an offer for the client and then have them sign the buyer brokerage agreement. And there were plenty of times when I got pushback from people. Why do I need to sign something, just to look at houses? And it's like, because I need to know that we are clear whether you're going to be a customer or a client. Well, within the past year or so, some things have changed nationally surrounding who pays the buyer's broker's compensation. And as a result of some litigation that took place, one thing that is required is that before you can show someone a property, you've got to get them to sign a buyer brokerage agreement or a customer acknowledgement. And one of the reasons that this is necessary and it is required is because we've got to make sure that, and I guess I can come out of screen share now, we've got to make sure that the buyer, whether they are a customer or a client, understands who is responsible for paying the buyer's broker's compensation. And as a result of that litigation, we have to spell it out in writing before we do any showings. And that's going to cut down on a whole lot of confusion. Now, the other thing that happened as a result of that litigation is that where for decades it was customary for the seller to pay the buyer's broker's compensation, it wasn't a requirement, but it was customary. We are kind of moving away from that. It doesn't mean that the seller won't pay the buyer's broker's compensation, but there's a chance that you might fall in love with the house where the seller is not willing to pay the buyer's broker's compensation, or they're only willing to pay a portion of it. So the powers that be decided that for the sake of clarity and to cut down on confusion, we as agents need to secure a signed brokerage agreement, or in the case of a customer acknowledgement. And both of those documents will set forth how much compensation the buyer's broker expects to receive. Now, keep in mind, that's negotiable. it is negotiable. But don't expect that there's any agent out there who's going to agree to show you houses until you find something that you like for a couple $100s. Even though it's negotiable, I don't want you to think that there's any agent out there who is going to show you multiple houses, spend countless hours pulling listings, taking you to see homes, drafting offers for a couple $100s. I just don't think that there are a bunch of agents out there who will do that. And usually it's going to be a percentage. It could be a flat fee, but typically a percentage of the sales price. And like I said, it's negotiable. The other thing that that customer acknowledgement or the buyer brokerage agreement is going to say, as it pertains to the buyer's broker's compensation, is whether you, as the client or the customer, want the agent to try to negotiate. And I guess the customer acknowledgement, let me look at that. Now that I think about it, the customer acknowledgement might not say that. So let's see. Both of those documents will stipulate whether or not you want your agent to seek all or a portion of the buyer's broker's compensation from the seller. And the seller may agree, the seller may not agree. What that customer acknowledgement or buyer brokerage agreement also says is that whatever portion of the buyer's broker's compensation the seller, and let me add a little asterisk to all this, the seller or the seller's broker is not willing to pay is your responsibility. So you can see why it's really important that you understand at the beginning of your relationship with your real estate agent that you may be responsible for paying a portion of their compensation. You don't want to get through the entire process and be going over the settlement statement, the ALTA, with your lender before closing and see a line item that says buyer's broker's compensation, $3,000 on your side. And you're like, oh crap, I didn't budget for that. What am I going to do? So having us secure this document in writing and that it is now a hard requirement, I think is really a good thing, particularly for buyers. It's just going to help you have much more clarity as to how much money you need to finance the purchase of your home. So that is the difference between being a customer and a client in Georgia. If you have any questions about this topic or anything else, feel free to drop them in the comments, call me, email me, whatever you need to do, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. You can also use the link in the description of this video to schedule a buyer consultation.